Like all of you in the crowd today, I spent a lot of time sitting where you are now, listening to people from different backgrounds and expertises speak, share their stories. It's something I've done for quite some time. And every time, I would leave inspired. But the more of these people I watched, the more of these talks I attended, I started to question something. What was it about these speakers that had us believing in them with such confidence? And how was it that, these strangers could have such an impact on us before we truly knew if they were capable or competent about what they were talking about at all? Now, this is a question that can be asked in many different environments. My name is Altai Paiden, and like a couple of you in the crowd today, I'm a first-year student here at IU University. And over the past couple of months, I've had the opportunity to meet hundreds of people from around the world. And before long, I started noticing the same thing happening. You see, within days, sometimes even hours, certain people were quickly being treated differently. They were asked for their opinion, deferred to, listened to. There was no formal process of any of this, no tests, and slowly but surely, a hierarchy formed. And certain people were placed at the top without having any real reason to be there. And I kept wondering why. What was it that these people had that others didn't? Was it intelligence? Was it their background? Was it some special gift that I just couldn't see? And I kept wondering, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, until one day I was walking down the halls, and I saw a group of 5, 6 guys talking about the upcoming Madrid game. But one of them stood out more than the others. You should have seen him. He spoke with this quiet, utter confidence. Game statistics, expected goals, even the weather conditions. He was certain, and absolutely certain, that Madrid were going to win that evening. Heck, I wasn't even a part of the conversation, and I was ready to bet 10 euros on Madrid that night, which I did. They lost. But here's what stuck with me. See, this guy could have been completely wrong about everything, and he probably was, considering they lost quite badly, but the way he spoke gave us no reason but to believe that he was right. And that's when it clicked. See, these people weren't necessarily geniuses in their fields or the most competent when it came to what they were talking about. It was something else. They had the ability to make it seem like they were to you. And that led me to an uncomfortable realization. In today's world, perceived competence is as important and sometimes even more important than actual competence itself. I'm not saying that competence doesn't matter, and I'm not saying that people are being dishonest. What I'm trying to say is that in most environments, competence isn't rewarded directly, but rather inferred. See, we oftentimes decide who seems capable long before we verify whether they actually are or aren't. But once that initial judgment is made, everything else follows. Who gets trusted? Who gets listened to? But most importantly, who gets opportunities? Now, if you want a clear example of how this all works, consider Frank Abagnale Jr., or as many of you know him as the character portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie Catch Me If You Can, where in the late 1960s, as only a teenager, Frank passed as an airplane pilot, a lawyer, and a doctor inside real institutions, such as Pan Am Airlines and the Louisiana Attorney General's Office. But that detail matters. Real institutions. This wasn't about casually fooling individuals in classroom settings, but this was about being accepted into institutions that were built and designed to evaluate competence. See, despite having any prior knowledge in any of these fields, Frank Abagnale proved the world that by using his perceived competence, he was able to break into these systems and show us of their flaws. Now, when I tell this story, the initial reaction is, Altai, how on earth can someone fake being a doctor? It's not like I or anyone else in this crowd can walk into a hospital confidently and perform a surgery. But that's where the irony comes in. See, Frank didn't pose as a surgeon, but as the head supervising doctor positioned above all of the actual surgeons. By using his perceived competence, he was placed higher up in the hierarchy in the medical world than the people who actually had what it takes to save someone's life. Now, what became dangerous was once Frank occupied these roles, verification stopped being urgent. Not because people were necessarily naive, but because questioning Frank and his position would have meant questioning the authorities and the system that put him there in the first place. And let's be honest, not many people are willing to do that in today's world. Now, I want to mention that Frank did all of this by maliciously forging documents and referrals, which is not how any of this should be used. Unless, of course, if you fancy spending the rest of your life in a jail cell next to Frank. I want to build on something I mentioned before. Actual competence still matters. Doing the work, knowing your field, building expertise, none of that goes away. But something has changed in today's world. See, for most of history, there was a gap between those who knew and those who didn't. This gap protected experts, created authority. If you had access to information and knowledge that others didn't, that alone made you valuable because that information was hard to come by. But that world doesn't exist anymore. Artificial intelligence is closing that gap at a rate nobody has fully anticipated. So in a world where that gap is shrinking, where information and knowledge is increasingly accessible to anyone with a simple handheld device, what can't be replicated so easily is the human element, the judgment, the presence, your ability to walk into a room and have people trust you, believe in you, follow what you have to say. And that's what perceived competence is all about. And that's why it matters more now than it ever has before. Not because substance doesn't count, but substance alone and sitting behind hesitation is no longer enough to set you apart. Before I leave you all, I want to admit something. This is my first time speaking at a public event, my first time standing on a stage like this, and my first time doing anything remotely close to what I'm doing right now. Yet, for most of this talk, most of you listened as if I were experienced. Not because I had years and years of experience when it came to public speaking or spoke at this conference and that one, but because I portrayed it well enough for you to assume it. And you see, that dictated everything. How much you listened, how much you trusted what I said, and how seriously you took it. So if I leave you with something today, it's be competent, do the work, but don't wait until you feel perfect to be seen. When I first saw the brochure of signing up for TEDxIE Madrid, the first things that came to my mind was that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't experienced enough. And why on earth would they choose an 18-year-old when everyone else had so much more to offer than I did on paper? Now, these negative thoughts consumed my mind, as it tends to do to a person, until later on that evening, I said, you know what? I'm going to sign up for that talk. I'm going to be as passionate and as confident as I can throughout the entire process and give them no reason to believe that I'm not competent enough to be here today. I told myself that make it or not, I just wanted to see how far it would take me. Roughly a month and a half later to that evening, ladies and gentlemen, here I am today in front of you all. Thank you. So sign up for that TED Talk. Apply to that job or internship, even if the acceptance rate is low. Because in a world that decides quickly, perception doesn't just reflect reality, but also helps create it. Thank you.